Hello everyone, welcome back to Rare Japanese Sounds, where we discuss everything and anything related to collecting Japanese music. And the other day I was around my local disc union in Shinjuku, where I just took the time to buy a very nice record by Makoto Matsushita, which you probably know because it's one of the more famous city pop albums, you could say. A very, very nice album overall. It was also for a nice price, but that's not the reason why I'm making this video. Actually, I also wandered around the different record shops in Shinjuku, and for those of you who have already been there, you know that there is a Tower Records right next to the Shinjuku station. When going around that Tower Record shop, I found this very interesting small list, which is the list of Tower Records buying records from people before they actually sell it to you. Of course, that's not something that we would be very familiar as buyers of records, but it's probably what most Japanese people will actually be interfacing with. You see, the average Japanese person will be more likely to get rid of a vinyl collection from someone in their family than trying to get one of their own. After all, vinyl is a dead format. It has no reason existing, and the only reason people collect it is just for the feeling of the physical medium. But most people, they will be more likely to sell their records. And so it's very important for any record store to have a list of things they buy and at what price. And I'm purposely not putting it close to the camera, so I'm not spoiling you everything. But of course, this is a very small list that just covers the most basic records that people are likely to have at home. It makes no sense to make a list like that for the very expensive jazz records, of which only 1,000 copies or so exist. But it makes a lot of sense to do a buy list. That's what we call it for records like, as you might see, Variety by Maria Takeuchi or For You by Tatsuro Yamashita. Those records sold hundreds of thousands of copies, and many people have them at home, at least in Japan. So what is this video today going to be about? This video is going to be about why buy lists are important and how we can look at prices of the buy list to have a general idea of the climate of vinyl records as a collector's item. And so that's why I wanted to start from this small list. Of course, we're not going to care about the two extremities because it's not Japanese music as far as I know. Yes, so the left and middle parts are Japanese music, but the left part is for the 90s and later, whereas the middle part is especially pop albums from the 80s, and they write it themselves actually, city pop on the middle. So yes, those are all city pop albums. But I'm going to let you have a look at the different albums that they want to purchase, and you will definitely notice Variety first, and right below Variety you have Love Trip. And what's extremely interesting is if you go on Yahoo Auctions right now and try to buy a copy of Variety, you will probably be able to get one for, if you want it in good condition with the obi, which is what the prices of the buy list are always, you will probably be able to find one for maybe 8,000 yen, maybe a bit more. If you go to a disc union, it will probably be 10,000 yen. What I'm getting at is they are buying a copy of Variety for 5,000, they are selling it for 10,000, so they make a 100% profit, and most of the prices here are for 100% profits. But the difference between the buy list price and the price on auction isn't that big. Of course, it's at least 50%, and it's a 3,000 yen difference. But what I'm getting at is when you look at Love Trip, the buy list price is actually not 5,000 yen, but 20,000. So that's pretty high. But if you look at Yahoo Auctions, the price of a near mint copy of Love Trip with the obi is at least 50,000 yen. So here you have more than double the markup, and the raw margin is like 30,000 yen, and it doesn't make any sense for someone who has at least a small amount of familiarity with Mercari or Yahoo Auctions to go and sell their copy of Love Trip to a record shop. And you can definitely see that this small leaflet is not aimed at record collectors. It's aimed at people who have a record collection at home from one of their family members, and in the collection most of the records will be completely worthless, but one or two will be very rare, like those ones. And that's what they want to capture. They want to capture that group of people. They don't want them to sell their records on Mercari or Yahoo Auctions. They want them to sell them to them, the record shop, and then they can sell the records at a markup, and a markup that is higher than the price that you can find them for online. You know, it's the convenience of buying in a record store, especially for very famous records like Variety or For You. By the way, For You is same price, 5,000, which is very interesting because 5,000, you can actually find good copies of For You in that condition for 5,000 yen online if you know where to look. So that's very interesting, the very small margin that they are ready to take for this kind of album. On the other hand, they want to take a very big margin for albums like Love Trip because it's much harder to sell. It's like you don't sell a 50,000 yen record every day. You need to have the right kind of buyer, and especially today in a climate where we are in an economic downturn, it's not a very good economic situation in general. So people might be more careful with how they spend, even though in practice people are spending more on things like collectibles. Not only records, of course, but all sorts of physical items in general, from gold to vinyl records to trading cards, you name it. This whole idea of collecting physical things as a refuge to protect yourself from inflation is something that is picking up steam very fast these days. And I guess record shops don't want to be holding the bag of very expensive records and not having anyone to sell them to. So why are buy lists important? Well, in the types of collectibles where buy lists exist, so I gave the example of trading cards, which is pretty good because people use buy lists a lot for trading cards. But for any collectible, it's nice to have buy lists as some kind of support to guarantee some kind of value for an item, and having a very high price for the buy list is a sign that a certain item is doing very, very well in terms of how easily it can sell, because it shows if the price of the buy list is very close to the market price, it shows that the person buying it is willing to sacrifice a lot of margin because they know they're going to sell it, and that way they don't have to make as big of a margin. So that's why when you look at the buy list for you at 5,000 yen, this is an extremely bullish indicator that a lot of people are buying copies of For You. It's just at that right price point and the right amount of popularity when someone goes into the record shop and finds a copy of For You, even though it's pretty expensive. Like right now, if you go to a disc union, they won't be selling For You for less than 7,000 yen. Like even if it's not a very good copy, it will at least be 7,000 yen. But that's still a price that people can buy, you know, on an impulse. And because a lot of people know about it, it's very easy to sell. That's the purpose of buy lists. On the other hand, it's also helpful to help you get rid of very expensive records that are also hard to get rid of. For instance, Love Trip. Of course, Love Trip is pretty easy to sell as it's a very popular city pop album. But when we get to, you know, the very, very obscure ambient stuff, it's always harder to sell. And I was looking at the buy list page on the Disc Union website, and I was in particular looking at the ambient music, of course, still Japanese prices. And I was very surprised by some of the results. For instance, some of you might be familiar with the album Marine Flowers by Akira Ito. This album, I think, can fetch upwards of 30,000 yen for nice copies. So you would think that the buy list would be around 50,000 yen, seeing the pattern that we can see here. But the buy list is actually at 6,000 yen. So from that, we can draw several conclusions. One, the buy list might simply be late compared to the evolution of the market price, which means that this recent increase of price is so recent that they didn't even have the time to update the buy list. And second, it shows that they aren't willing to increase the buy list yet. Because again, when you start getting to that very expensive range of albums that have very low demand, you don't really want to have a ton of them on hand. It's a very good type of item to have in your record store for people. When they come in, they are very excited to see the album just being on display and ready to purchase. Like, it gives a good impression of your store when you have rare items. On the other hand, if you have too much, you have a lot of capital that is parked into those records that might take months to sell, especially with the markup that you want. But 6,000 yen, that's like 25% of the price you could sell it for on Yahoo Auctions. On the other hand, I saw that the buy list price for, so this one is pretty obscure, but it's called Saiki by Masayuki Sakamoto or something. So this is an album that's part of the Shizen label. And if you follow this channel, you know that I'm big fan of the Shizen label. But this one is one of the later albums of the label. And it's not very well known. It's probably the rarest in terms of quantity of discs that were ever produced. The fact is, if you go on auction and try to buy it, which is not often, but good condition, it's, I would say, 25,000 yen, but the buy list was at 20,000 yen. And I actually wasn't able to come up with a good explanation. One would be that the price has been declining for a very long time and that the price used to be above that, but I didn't find any recent auction data from like before 2015. Before 2019 or so. So it's pretty hard to tell exactly what the price used to be. But if we like take as an example the rest of the Japanese music market, it's probably not as high as it's right now. So the question is, why would they bother to have such a high buy list price compared to the price on auction? And my guess is the album is so rare and it comes up on auction so rarely that people who really want this album will probably be ready to spend much more than the average auction price for the opportunity to buy the record right now. So if you go to a disc union and you see the copy of Saiki for, let's say, 40,000 yen, well, it's pretty expensive compared to what you can expect to pay, but on the other hand, you don't have any other option. It's not for sale on Discogs, it's not for sale anywhere else, and being the only one to sell that record allows you to put it for a much higher price. One last thing that I thought would be interesting to mention is the price of buy lists for Hiroshi Yoshimura's two very expensive records. I'm talking, of course, about Green and Surround. So those albums come up on auction so rarely that it's hard to say exactly, but Green probably in the 100,000 yen range, and Surround, last time it was sold for disc union, I think I remember seeing one for maybe 60,000 yen, perhaps more. But what is very surprising is the buy list for Green is actually at only maybe 35,000 yen. It's something around that ballpark. But for an album that is as popular as Green, you would have no trouble as disc union marking it up for a very expensive price. So the way I see it, it shows that disc union is not comfortable putting such a high price on an album like Green because they're afraid it just won't sell. So it's very interesting to see, depending on the genre of music, you don't have the same type of buyers and you won't have the same type of behavior when a buyer rolls into the shop and just see the record that they have been looking for but haven't been able to purchase. So if the type of buyer for, let's say, jazz music loves to buy from record shops and likes to have the idea of being able to see the record, give it a listen, like you can test the record in the record shop, which you can do on auction. Some people value that very highly, but for other genres of music, people just don't care. They want the record. That's why you see also different buy list prices and market prices for records with DOB or without DOB. And the rarer the record, the less it matters whether or not you have all the elements of the album. That's because simply when you have an album that sold millions of copies, all the value is concentrated into the top copies, like the pristine copies, never played, like never touched, the album is in perfect condition. But that mostly matters for the albums that sold so well that you have a very broad choice in terms of which copy to buy. In Japanese music, you don't really have that, at least for the more popular albums, which usually aren't bestsellers. The exceptions, of course, would be, Variety for You. And perhaps for those two albums and similar ones, we will see a trend of the top copies fetching higher and higher with the normal copies getting less and less. But we have a difference between Japan and the West in general in terms of how people took care of the records. It's much easier to find a very, very good looking and sounding record in Japan, where people took a bit more care of the records than I would say in Europe or in the US. One thing is for sure, the higher your record gets, and the less people are going to, like, the more value you're going to have just for having the jacket and the disc, even if it's not in great condition. But at some point you start getting into a range of price, and I'm here mentioning specifically jazz records, where the record becomes so expensive that the people who buy it just want a perfect copy, and that's all. So you start seeing again this kind of disparity between copies depending on their condition. So as you can see, it's a very difficult landscape to navigate, and that's why as a record store you need to be very careful about what price you offer on a record. And of course this can be influenced by whether the record has had reissues, how many times, how big the reissues were in terms of numbers of copies sold. As you can see, it's so difficult that I don't blame record stores for offering pretty low prices on the buy list. But I was at least surprised to find that some of the buy list prices were pretty high compared to what you would expect them to sell for. So that makes me think perhaps the record stores have some information that we don't. Maybe they are aware a bit in advance of what reissues are coming out, or maybe they have, good contact with people who are regular buyers, or they are able to follow the trend better than, for instance, I can. So that's just food for thought, but I think it's a very interesting discussion, because stores, whether we like it or not, and also whether they are physical or not, they are a very important part of the collecting landscape for vinyl records. And even just online shops work as some kind of middleman between people who have records sitting in their attics and people who desperately want to buy those. So I hope that stores will keep existing, especially physical ones. It's always a pleasure, browsing physically through records somewhere. In any case, this was Rare Japanese Sounds. I hope that you've learned a thing or two about record shops in Japan and their way of buying and selling records. At least I hope that it will have made you think, and I'm waiting for your insight in the comments. In any case, until next time, stay tuned.